Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 17th of January of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And summarizing everything that took place today, yesterday, the day before yesterday, we can make a conclusion: the closer we get to the Trump's inauguration, the more events shake the world. Let's start and let's discuss them in details. And first let's talk about Hungary. Today, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, made a very interesting statement. He stated that Ukraine no longer exists. Hungarian Prime Minister: it does not exist without Western money. Economic activity is in ruins, and the country's accession to the European Union would pose a major threat to the European economy and agriculture. That was stated by him. Furthermore, today we got very important updates from Moscow. Today, the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, visited Russia with the purpose to have talks with the president of Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. And this evening, Putin and the Pezeshkian signed an agreement on a comprehensive strategic partnership between Russia and Iran. Currently, Russia has two agreements of the same type. The first one was signed several months ago with North Korea, and the second one was signed today with Pezeshkian and Iran. And I'll remind you that as a result of signing an agreement with North Korea, we could see up to 12,000 North Korean soldiers in the Sumy direction fighting with Ukrainian forces. It is very difficult to imagine what kind of units, forces, or weapon or technologies we can see from Iran in the area of the special military operation. And I would like to remind you that according to information we have, the same agreement should be signed with the Republic of Belarus, the closest and nearest allies of Russian Federation. This is very important because this agreement is very important, and the main importance of this importance that during the president campaign, the elected president of the United States of America, Trump made lots of statements about Iran, saying that Trump is going to press Iran as never before, and many other things. And there were talks and rumors that even Donald Trump gave a green light to Israel to begin bombing its nuclear facilities. So anyway, despite the fact whether it's true or not, anyway, starting on the 17th of January, it will be very difficult for the Western countries to press and to push this mid-eastern country. Now let's discuss the situation in Ukraine, and probably today we got lots of very interesting updates, and the most important are coming from the city of Kryvyi Rih. Today the Russian sources, according to information we have, attacked the territory of Kryvyi Rih with the use of Iskander missiles. In this video we can see several explosions that took place in the northwestern part of the settlement. The Russians are saying that they attacked and bombed the college, the Kryvyi Rih college, where Ukrainians were training the aircraft pilots or something like this. And this is the video from the college itself. As you can see, the building was completely reduced to ruins. Several explosions, several buildings were destroyed. Currently we don't see and we don't know about the losses that Ukraine suffered as a result of this attack, but the Russians are saying that the losses are very huge. Now let's move to the Sumy direction. We have a lot of very interesting details and lots of changes on map. As for the Sumy direction, today we have adjusted the map in the vicinity of the village of Alexandria and to the west of Viktorovka. As for the Alexandria, today the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation gave us a very small article, let's say a summary about the situation in this direction. And the Russians are saying that since the beginning of the Ukrainian offensive operation in this area, the Russians managed to restore control over 63.2% of the initially occupied Kursk region territory by the Ukrainians, and this territory were liberated. Also, the Russians reported that during the previous 2 weeks of January, the Russians managed to restore control over the settlement of Alexandria, Leonidovo, Ruskaya Porечная, and Kruglinka. 3 of these villagers were already colored in Russian favor, and the village of Alexandria was colored in Russian favor today, based on the report of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. Furthermore, we have adjusted the map in the vicinity of Viktorovka based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian side. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainian fighting infantry vehicle was counterattacking the Russian positions to the the southwest of Viktorovka, and as a result of this counter-offensive, most likely the Ukrainians managed to restore control over some 3 lines and the fortifications. Based on this video, we haven't adjusted anything in the point of clashes. The Ukrainian vehicle was moving along this tree line and then attacking Russians in this point, but based on this video we have adjusted everything to the west of this position. So the fields, some trees and some forests were colored in Russian favor as a result of clashes in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Vovchansk or in the Kharkiv direction. Today, according to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Tikha. This was a very tough nut for the Russians. The clashes around the settlement have been taking place for the previous 3 or 4 months. The Russians were trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area, but most of those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians, and as I understand now, the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy some reserves and reinforcements in the Kursk direction. Today we got lots of statements that Syrsky continues sending more and more troopers in the Kursk area. According to information we have from the open source, for example, 128th Mountain Assault Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine was redeployed in the direction of Sudzha. This 128th Brigade used to be located in the vicinity of Orekhov. Then this brigade was spotted in the area of Velyka and Novosilka. Now, according to information we have, this unit was redeployed in the Sudzha direction, and we see that Ukrainians are not planning to fall back from this territory. So anyway, several units were redeployed and from the Kharkiv direction, and that allowed the Russians to carry out several fast lightning attacks, and as a result of those attacks, the village and the settlement of Tikha was captured by the Russians completely. The Russians most likely are not going to stop. They will continue advancing with the purpose to take under control everything along the river of Vovcha, and maybe then the Russians will make attempt to cross the river with the purpose to attack settlements along the road that goes along the same river. So the situation is very interesting, and I'll remind you that during the previous several weeks we've been talking a lot about Russian offensive operation on the Ukrainian side of the river of Oskol, and you know that when talking about this direction, mainly the Russians were moving in the northwestern direction, and now we see that the Russians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of Vovchansk, and the Russians may try to attack in the southeastern direction with the purpose to meet forces somewhere in the vicinity of the settlement like Velyky Burluk or somewhere in this area. So something tells me that the Russians are about to begin another full-scale offensive operation in the northern Kupyansk direction. Now let's move further and let's talk about the central Kupyansk direction. Currently, there are very heavy clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians. During the previous 24 hours, we got one geolocation published by the Russian side. In this video, we can see how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian vehicle that was abandoned by the Ukrainians during another offensive operation, and then the Russians destroyed this vehicle as a result of artillery strikes or as a result of several FPV drone attacks. Anyway, based on this video, we have adjusted the map because most likely this company stronghold that is located to the north of the geolocation is under complete Ukrainian control. As for the settlement of Zelyony, today the Ukrainian forces from the 44th Mechanized Brigade published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russian units in the vicinity of Zelyony. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russian troopers that were moving from the settlement of Vishnyovo along the tree lines in the direction of Zelyony. So we've been talking a lot for the previous several days about the settlement of Zelyony. The Russians are advancing in this direction. This is very important settlement. This is very small but very important settlement, and if Ukrainians lose control over this territory, then we can say that the battle for the village of Borova has begun. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sivers direction. As for this territory, the most important updates during the previous 24 hours are coming from the Slaviansk direction. This is like something to the south of the city of Siversk itself. Just to take a look at these geolocations, first of all, and the most important is the number of geolocations that came from this area during the previous 24 hours. The Russians were bombing and attacking this territory during the previous 24 hours with everything they have. The Russians were bombing this territory with artillery forces, with soft flamethrower systems, with aviation, with FPV drones, with tanks from hidden positions. This number of icons from this area reminds us or tell us that maybe the Russians are trying to carry out an artillery preparation before further advance along the MO3 road, or with the purpose to outflank the city of Siversk from the south. In this video we can see artillery strikes and aviation strikes. In this area we can see probably several FABs arrived on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, and a lot of geolocations are coming from the settlement of Vasyukovka. In this video that was published by the Russian sources, we can see a lot of episodes of how the Russians were attacking FPV droning and bombing Ukrainian positions in the area of the village of Vasyukovka with the significant number of FPV drones. So basically the settlement was completely cleared by the Russians, and the only thing left for the Russians is to enter this territory with the units and soldiers with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory. This significant number of geolocations that we got from this direction tell us that most likely the Russians indeed have some plans to begin offensive operation in this area with the purpose to outflank the city of Siversk from the south. First, most likely during the next 48 hours, the Russians will try to attack the farms that located in the eastern part of Vasyukovka. Then one group of Russian forces will try to attack in the western direction with the purpose to take under control the buildings that located along the river of Vasyukovka. But I'm not sure that the Russians are planning to move further. The main task of this operation is to secure the western flank. And while the western flank is being secured, the main Russian forces will try to attack in the direction of Fyodorovka from the south and the southwest. So I expect that something like this is going to happen in the very near future in this Siversk direction. I'll remind you that since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians made significant number of attempts to attack the city of Siversk from the east, from the southeast, but most of those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians without any problems, and during the previous 2 or 3 years the Russians suffered significant losses in this area. And after another general came and become responsible for this direction, we see that the Russians changed their tactics, and now everything tells us that maybe the Russians will try to outflank the city of Siversk from the south and from the southwest, and maybe this activity along the MO3 road and in the area of Vasyukovka is the beginning of this outflanking operation. Because, and the most important, that now the Russians can do this because the battle for the city of Chasiv Yar is about to be finished. And when city of Chasiv Yar falls, the Russians by this maneuver will be able to secure their western and the southwestern flank, and the Russian units in the area of Solidar and northern Bakhmut will be able to begin this offensive in the direction of Siversk. Let's continue with the city of Chasiv Yar. During the previous 24 hours we got a lot of updates, icons and videos exactly from this area. In this video we can see how the Russian soldiers were moving along the industrial zone of the city of Chasiv Yar, which is 100% proof that this territory was completely captured by the Russians and secured. Several sources reported that the Russians continue advancing deep inside of the city itself, but as for now we haven't received anything that can confirm this. Instead of this we have a video that show us the Russian reconnaissance operation. The Russians were flying with drones were flying above the southern part of the citadel, trying to discover another Ukrainian position, and as a result of several strikes one building was damaged and most likely Ukrainian positions were destroyed. So anyway, we see that the Russians are not planning to stop, they're not going to stop, they will continue moving further until the final building of the city of Chasiv Yar becomes under complete Russian control. As for the city of Toretsk, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything from this area, but it doesn't mean that there are no clashes. Obviously the Russians continue their clearing operation. They try to finish the battle for the city of Toretsk before the 20th of January, before the Trump's inauguration. They're planning to secure the territory. Maybe they want even to make some celebration of this victory in the territory of Toretsk before Trump's inauguration. So anyway, I expect that by the 20th of January we are going to to receive the official statement of the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation about complete control over Toretsk and its agglomeration. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, where we can see that the Russians are introduced their unstoppable force. The Russians are advancing, and we see that Ukrainians can't do anything with the Russian offensive, Russian units, Russian tactics, Russian weapon, Russian army. The Ukrainians every single day are moving back, retreating more and more kilometers, fields, fortifications are taken by the Russians every single day. Now let's discuss in details, and today every single mapper, most of the mappers, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian and neutral mappers confirmed additional progress on the ground in the triangle between the settlements of Udachne-Kotlyne and Zverova. As for the village of Zverova, the Russian sources and pro-Ukrainian sources reported that during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. The dynamic in this area probably now is the fastest and the biggest along the entire line of combat contact. There are very heavy clashes for the territory of the settlement of Kotlyne. Different mappers can show us different picture on the ground. Some sources are saying that the Russians control just the positions along the railways. Some sources are saying that the Russians control the southern and the northern railways. As for pro-Russian sources, they stated that the Russians managed to establish control over more than 80 or 70 or 80% of the settlement. And the most important is that these industrial facilities were captured by the Russians, and currently this is the main stronghold of the armed force of Russian Federation in the Pokrovsk direction. Obviously the Russians will try to concentrate as much as possible, as many as possible soldiers, vehicles in this area, and this will allow the Russians to secure their northern and the northwestern flank of the Pokrovsk offensive operation. And when this flank is being secured, another group of Russian forces most likely will intensify their activities in the direction of the central part of Udachne. As for now, we got reports that the Russians entered the village Udachne, but they stopped advancing further, because as for now, this group of forces has just one primary target: to secure the western flank, while the Russian units are trying to clear Kotlyne. But when Kotlyne will be cleared by the Russians, then the Russians will continue advancing in Udachne. So this is very complicated but very interesting offensive operation, which can be the breaking point in the entire battle for the city of Pokrovsk. Of course, we are waiting for the geolocations in this area. As for now, we haven't received anything that can confirm this. The only geolocation we got is from the settlement of Kotlyne, but this geolocation, for example, show us that the village of Kotlyne, still the southern part of the village, is still under complete Ukrainian control, but probably the video was made several days ago when the Ukrainian positions were there. Now let's discuss the situation in the Dnipro direction, where the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt probably the 10th time in a row. The Russians continue advancing, and just today 2 villages were captured by the Russians completely, and another village is about to be captured, and most likely it will happen during the next 24 hours. First, let's talk about the settlement of Yasenevo. Today, several mappers like neutral mappers and pro-Ukrainian mappers reported that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over this settlement. And based on this video, we have adjusted the map. In just a second, I will change the icon. And based on this video and based on this posts and updates, we have adjusted Yasenevo in contested area. But right before we start making the video, the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russians in the northwestern part of the settlement along this tree line, while the Russians were moving further in the direction of Vremivka. We have the tree line, and we can see Ukrainian drone that was dropping bombs on the heads of the Russian soldiers. This event took place exactly in this area, and based on this video we have adjusted the entire Yasenevo itself and the territories around. Furthermore, different sources reported that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to answer the village of Novosilka from the south. So now, as you can see, the Russians reached the outskirts of Novosilka from the south, the Russians reached the outskirts of the settlement from the north, and most likely due to the fact that the settlement of Novosilka is very small, just several buildings, most likely this village would be captured by the Russians by the end of the 18th of January, and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back towards the settlement of Zaporizhia. As for the settlement of Zaporizhia, the Ukrainians are trying to organize some defense, to bring some forces, some units with the purpose to slow the Russians at least a little bit, but we see that everything that Ukrainians are doing doesn't help them. All these actions don't help the Ukrainians to stabilize the situation. Everything that comes in this area is being destroyed by the Russians as a result of different drones attacks. The situation for the Ukrainians is very critical, and I'll remind you that the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, let's say he rejected the proposal or demand of the Western countries to lower the mobilization age. Now let's discuss the situation in the village of Slavyanka. As for this territory, first we got some map update from pro-Ukrainian sources, and later, somewhere at noontime, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, this settlement also was captured by the Russians. Based on this report, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor, and now we see that the Russians continue advancing in the direction of the settlement of Andreevka from the north. So anyway, it's very difficult to say when exactly the Russians are going to get the border with the Dnipro region, but obviously we can start counting days. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kurakhove direction, and as you can see, the situation here is very critical. A lot of icons, a lot of changes on the ground, and the situation is just a disaster for the Ukrainians. First, let's discuss the situation to the east of Constantinople. Today, the Russian sources, it's not like just today, it's probably the third or fourth day in a row, the Russians published the videos, another video of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions along the bridge to the main supply line between Constantinople and Udachne. In this video, we can see the the village of Constantinople itself, and we can see how the Russians were bombing the main supply lines. Just yesterday, almost the same video was published by the Ukrainian side, by the Russian side, and in this video from another angle, from a very close zoom, we can see how the Russians were bombing the main supply line with FABs. So the Russians bomb this territory every single day. The most important task and the most important reason of these attacks, not to allow the Ukrainians to evacuate vehicles, tanks and soldier servicemen from this Kurakhove pocket towards the mainland. And according to these geolocations, the number of these geolocations, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Ukrainian soldiers in this direction finally received an order to retreat, to fall back, to save their lives and to escape this pocket. And all these icons tell us just one thing, that Ukrainians began moving today in the direction of Udachne, and the Russians began bombing the main supply line. The Ukrainians are trying to run away and to escape encirclement, and everything that leaves some shelters and some positions where they were trying to hide the vehicles, of course, is being discovered by the Russians and immediately destroyed. In this video, we can see another group of Ukrainians that were trying to escape the pocket but was discovered by the Russians and destroyed. In this video, we can see several vehicles of the armored forces of Ukraine that was trying to escape the line of combat contact through the fields, through the minefields in the direction of Udachne, but the Russians discovered this vehicle, managed to get the vehicle and destroy as a result of FPV drone attack. In the western part of Udachne, another vehicle was trying to escape the squadron with probably several soldiers of the armored forces of Ukraine on board, but when the vehicle began moving in the western direction, the vehicle was discovered by the Russians and destroyed. So as you can see, the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult, and most likely they will be forced to abandon all their vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles in this area. Otherwise, everything would be destroyed with the soldiers on board. The sources reported that while the Russians established complete control and hunt Ukrainian vehicles, the Russian troops managed to enter the settlement of Udachne from the southeast, and there are very heavy clashes already on the territory of the settlement, and most likely the Russians will finish the battle for the village tomorrow, because this upcoming night is going to be the vital and decisive night for the Ukrainians. They're gonna have to, and they're gonna need to use several hours of night with the purpose to escape this situation, escape the village of Udachne, and to get as close as possible to the settlement of Udachne. Now let's discuss the situation in the key region of the 17th of January of 2025, the Velyka and Novosilka direction. This morning, pro-Ukrainian mappers and neutral mappers and pro-Russian mappers reported that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Vremivka. And you saw the previous video, and when we were making the previous video, we colored this territory as a contested area because we got just statements from different reliable mappers without any proofs. But by the end of the 17th of January, the Russians published the photo. It's just a photo, it's not a video. This is just a photo, and in this photo we can see the flag, Russian flag, in almost the most northern part of Vremivka. It's just the photo, it's not a video. We haven't seen the video yet. Obviously the video will be published maybe tomorrow, during the 18th of January. But in this video we can see how the Russians managed to raise the flag above this shop. It's just a small shop, and this territory, by the time the photo was published, was already captured by the Russians. Based on this photo, we have adjusted the map and we have colored almost 80% of Vremivka in Russian favor. Obviously, maybe there are still Ukrainians in the most northern part, but they can't do anything, and they can't, the most important, to help the Ukrainians that are currently located in the central part of Velyka Novosilka and in the northern part to escape the encirclement and to reach the company stronghold in the northwestern direction. Today, on the 17th of January, the village, the settlement of Velyka Novosilka and its agglomeration was officially encircled by the Russians without any chances for the Ukrainians from this area to escape this terrible disaster. Most likely the Ukrainians will be able to show some resistance for the next several days, but then Ukrainians will be forced to surrender. And something tells me that we are going to see lots of prisoners of war exactly from the territory of this settlement. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.